Okay, so now we're going to talk about the era of good feeling. This should be a pretty quick one. I'm going to try and run through it. Remember, this is a skeletal outline, not going into crazy detail here. Refer to your notes if you want a little bit more detail, or come talk to me, one of your TAs, or Dr. Stoll. All right? So, era of good feeling. What's it all about? Well, first of all, let's put it in a period. All right? Think of it between the very end of the War of 1812 to Jackson's presidency, okay? Why is it called the era of good feeling? Well, for one thing, we go to one party. You remember how we were Federalists, first Republican for ages and ages? Federalists, they're out. All right, during the War of 1812, we have this thing called the Hartford Convention. Remember how messed up the War of 1812 was? It doesn't really solve anything. It's just a complete mess. Federalists get together and say, listen, we got to change all these things so this doesn't happen again. We're going to change the way we do things. Noble intentions, but Jackson screwed everything up. Remember, Battle of New Orleans, General Jackson ends up winning. Americans kind of take this as a virtual victory in the war, and they look at the Federalists as sort of being anti-patriotic, and they're kicked out, you know. So, interesting stuff there. We become a Republican nation, which is the ideal scenario. That's what Washington wanted all along. The guy who's going to be running the show, James Monroe, he's the last founding fathers president, last to the Virginia dynasty, a well-respected guy all around, definitely does some interesting stuff, okay? Here's how we're going to divide this era of good feeling. International stuff over here, domestic stuff over here, all right? Let's start with the international stuff, okay? First thing that happens, Monroe establishes really, really good relations with England, excellent English relations. How does it translate? Well, after the War of 1812, England says, you know what, we just got to acknowledge that America is another power. And guess what? They're actually our brothers, so you know what? We're going to start treating them a lot better. This means that we're going to have to deal with Canada, though, because we haven't really established a proper border between Canada and the United States. We decide to tackle this. We say, hey, you know the 49th parallel? We're going to make that the border. Works out great for America. We get a whole lot more land in this little divide. Really cool stuff. That's going to become the longest demilitarized border in the world. Still is to this day. We basically take Canada off the map as an enemy territory. They're going to be our buddies from now on. This is also going to open up the Oregon Territory. We kind of decide to share the load with Great Britain there for a while. We say, okay, you'll have some administratively, we'll have some administratively, but ultimately the United States is going to completely take control of it. So that's one problem sorted. Another thing we got, the Adams-Onis Treaty, all right? This is an interesting little historical episode. First thing that happens, we got an Indian problem, okay? Indians still going around, still causing some trouble for a lot of settlers. General Jackson gets fed up with this because a lot of Indians go raid the colonies and they'll run into Florida, where Americans can't go to because it's Spanish territory, and they'll take refuge. Jackson says, screw that, I'm going into Florida, I'm chasing down these damn Indians, and he does. This causes like a really bad international incident. We could have gone to war in a big way because of this. But John Quincy Adams, Secretary of the State at this time, he gets together with Spain and he says, you know what, we can work this out. You know what, Spain, times are tough for you. You got all kinds of revolutions going on in Latin America. Florida has basically no strong government presence. Let America take it off your hands. We'll pay you a hefty sum for it. So we get Florida. Also, we're going to establish a firm border with Spain. We're basically going to say from Louisiana to Oregon, that's where our border is going to be. Think of it kind of like a jagged, diagonal line going through America right there. So really important, we get Florida, establishes a firm border with Spain. So it started out as a rough little incident, but things ended up going pretty well in the end. One last thing, and this is the big thing on the international side. We decide that we're going to implement what's called the Monroe Doctrine. All right, now this is inspired because we have tons of revolutions going on in Latin America. Remember I talked about how Spain was weak right now? Well, Latin America takes notice of that, and there's just revolutions coming left and right, left and right. America sees this, they say, hell yeah, get rid of these European assholes who are pushing us around. And they say, how can we support these guys without blatantly sending an army? Well, we're going to establish a new foreign policy. It's pretty bold. It says a couple things. First of all, it says, hey, Europe, no new colonies. You can't come into the Western Hemisphere and just start establishing colonies willy-nilly. You can't stick your flag somewhere and expect it to be yours, you know? Another thing is no Euro governments. We don't want any kings or queens. We don't want any European-style government. We're going to do things our own way in the Western Hemisphere. Finally, we got no European interference. We don't want any military intervention. We don't want you involved in any of the politics over here. We want to do things our own way. It's basically giving Europe a big middle finger. It's pretty bold stuff. And it's kind of going to affect our policy from now on. In a way, it's saying, Europe, you stay out of this. We're in control now. And effectively, that's kind of how America's going to look at the Western Hemisphere from this point on. It's also worth noting that existing colonies are going to be okay. So anything that England's got that is still part of their empire, like Canada, for example, that's okay. It's just the new stuff that we're watching out for. Okay. So that's kind of the international stuff down. Let's take a look at the domestic stuff. Really, 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 really important invention, cotton gin. Everybody knows about it. You got Eli Whitney, he gets it all set up. Now, why is this kind of like the de facto known fact in all American history classes? If I ask you who invented the cotton gin, everybody says Eli Whitney. Do you know why it's so important though? Okay? It makes cotton infinitely more profitable, okay? It's going to allow cotton production to double, triple, you know? We can now farm different types of cotton, long grain cotton, not just the short grain stuff. And that makes slavery much more profitable. Cotton production goes up, therefore slaves, the slave population goes up. There's a direct correlation between the two. If Eli Whitney hadn't have invented the cotton gin, slavery maybe wouldn't have grown to the extent that it did before the Civil War. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, it directly feeds into this next bubble right here, the Missouri Compromise. So, we got this state, Missouri. Territory. Missouri Territory. They apply to become a state, and they say, hey, there's a lot of money to be made with slavery through this cotton because of the cotton gin. We're going to apply to be a slave state. So Congress hears about this. They say, well, yeah, we definitely want to make Missouri a state, but a slave state? That could be an issue. Why? Well, it just so happens that all of the states have been perfectly divided between the free states and the slave states. And that's going to be an issue because if we make Missouri a slave state, that means the Senate is going to have a slave state majority. And that really irks everybody, okay? Now, this is kind of manifested in this thing called the Talmadge Amendment. Talmadge is a guy in Congress, in the House of Representatives. He's going to say, you know what, I'm just going to make an amendment that says, yeah, Missouri, you can be a state, but you got to make yourselves free. Get through the House of Representatives. Remember, it represents the popular vote. Makes it to the Senate, does not pass the Senate. So it kind of illustrates that point. And we think that this is actually going to cause our country to implode. Things get extremely tense, extremely quickly. But luckily, we get this guy named Henry Clay who comes along. He's kind of known through history as the great compromiser. And he says, hey, listen, Missouri will let you be a slave state, but we're going to make Maine a free state. And that'll balance things out in the Senate. And you know what? Just to prevent problems from happening in the future, we're going to say that the 3630, all right, this little line that goes through the country, divides north and south. Any new states that are north of this line, they're going to be free. Anything that's south of that line is going to be slave. Effectively makes the north-south border, okay? Now, this is going to cause a lot of problems later. It's basically planting the seed of the Civil War, but we're talking a lot later. For a generation, the slave debate is effectively silenced because of this Missouri Compromise, okay? Really important stuff. We're not going to deal with slavery again until the 1850s. So even though it doesn't effectively solve the problem, it definitely delays it for quite a while. Interesting stuff. So those are the big points of the era of good feeling. Definitely a short section of the lecture. But yeah, let me know what you think. If you liked it, let me know. All right, that's it.